Inventory is surging across Florida, and now the data is trickling nationwide. Florida, folks, has a lot of underpinning issues that are going to set it up for an interesting 2024. And I'm going to tell you why today, because we are seeing more data from the marketplace that people are getting laid off at higher numbers. And particularly, the thing I'm most concerned about for all of Florida is that we're seeing a return to work at the retirement age. So we're seeing a record amount of people now hitting news, people that are in their golden age, really that are supposed to be resting, relaxing, and enjoying their life, are being forced to come back into a work situation under the pressure of mounting costs. Now, if you've been watching the news, we've seen the Fed recently take a victory lap saying, hey, you know what? We give, cuts are coming, and they started to announce that they're actually going to go into a pattern of reversing the interest rate into next year, which in and of itself is not news, folks. We already knew the Fed would all likelihood cut interest rates. But what everybody is missing is the fact that the reason that the Fed is actually announcing that most likely is directed from the Fed seeing trouble spots all over the economy and causing them to fear leaving interest rates at the levels they currently are. At the same time, folks, it is unavoidable how many different major companies from Bank of America, Wall Street firms, all across the marketplace, many business leaders armed with the best economists across our country have been warning and sounding alarms. What they've been calling is a mild recession. Go ahead and Google it. Google mild recession and hit the news button in Google. You will see a chain of articles all over North America, including Canada, that something wintry and cold this way comes. And folks, you already know I've been keeping you apprised of the Florida housing market that one of the biggest trouble signs that we have in our marketplace is the fact that our inventory is growing much faster than any other state in the country. Our metro areas are growing with inventory. They are now higher, folks. Listen to this, because this last month, we posted a 20% increase in new listings. A lot of inventory hitting the market because people in Florida, for whatever reasons, maybe it's the older crowd, they no longer can afford a house, so they're in a situation where they're having to return back to work and they can't hang on. I've been showing you on this channel that the oldest median age counties in Florida are seeing a deluge of inventory hitting the market. And folks, you got to understand, what's really troubling about this bit of news is the fact that the older demographic was the most likely buyer in 2023. So if we lose the buyer who's 55, 60 years of age, who is unfortunately at this point, and I say unfortunately, I'm happy that 55 and 60-year-olds can buy homes. But the problem you have in Florida and some of the most expensive marketplaces around the country that completely went up 80, 90% in value over the past 2 or 3 years, you have to understand these markets are so out of reach for everybody under 50 years of age that the actual marketplace participation is dangerously low. And at the same time, folks, I'm going to show you right here, we are heading into 2024, and we in all likelihood are going to have inventories that we have not seen in 5 to 6 years. I'm going to prove to you today that our current level of inventory, when you combine how many new listings slammed into the marketplace in Florida and how much new construction has been put on the books, because permit levels throughout Florida are astronomically high. They're 30% higher than pre-pandemic. So you gotta understand, you now have the common owner pushing their existing home in the market, but you have way more builder supply. And I got news for you. If you're on social media, you're on Facebook, Twitter, all these different places, you follow any realtors or any mortgage loan officers, anybody that's tied to the real estate industry, you see them all super pumped because in the last 45 days, we saw interest rates go from 8% multi-year high, a decade level high in October, slammed down to 6.6% this week. You have a ton of people out there saying, you got to get in, you got to buy now before interest rates even change even further, because ultimately your window is going to close. And here's the reality, folks. If you look at the mortgage banking data from October into November, even as interest rates went down, okay? And yet mortgage applications dropped. Mortgage applications fell month over month. Yes, they're up over last year, but month over month, you would expect that, hey, look, I was iced out of the market. I couldn't get in at 8%, but now it's at 6.75. What's stopping people? At NestShare, we list your home for just 3%, saving you $25,000 on the sale of your property. That's right, 3% total, full MLS, full high definition photography, full broker support by #1 company in the US from start to finish. Visit nestshare.com before you list your next home, and don't let anybody you know sell before talking to us. The other thing that I think is going to be dangerous to the 2024 housing market is the fact that all of this ballooning inventory in the builder side, 30% up. If you look at Jacksonville, Orlando, and Tampa, and if you look back at how much inventory is in the pipe coming through total permits, it's 30% higher than 6 months prior to the pandemic. So coming to the pandemic, which we would consider that normal times, we didn't shock our market, we didn't do a bunch of Fed stimulus, we hadn't froze our economy solid and actually made everybody quit working and go home. All before that, you had 30% more builder permits being pulled this year, middle of this year, than back then, folks. The other thing you have to understand on all this is that most of the buyers in the public right now are either FHA, so they're first-time home buyers. They're borrowing like 97% of the property's value. Or you have the other side of this where you have the older demographic who's all that's left to participate in the Florida market and what is going to happen. The larger concern I have isn't for the 55 plus crowd. It's the fact that a lot of the new construction is going to the FHA crowd. Folks, you got to understand this. Through the last 3 years, a lot of people were paying way over appraised value to purchase homes. Many people saw crazy stories. $100,000 over the asking price, wave appraisal contingencies, the property appraised way less than what they paid for it. And now we're in the face of slowing price appreciation, right? Redfin just came out today and said, guess what? We are now seeing 3 months in a row cascadingly slow price appreciation. This past month, it was only up 0.6%. And folks, add to all that, even in November, when you had interest rates coming down, you had interest rates drop from 8 to 7 and now in the 6s. And people are still canceling their contracts at an alarming rate. This has been an ongoing conversation, folks. And you look at the market out and you understand the fact that all the people that are actually engaging in buying homes are going under a contract. They're not even inspecting the property, then they're bailing out. And obviously, we know the reasons why. But the headlines are sketchy, folks. We're seeing the quiet quitting crowd go into the quiet cutting crowd. You have the idea that people were quietly quitting, or they would basically start to threaten their employer. Hey, look, I can make $10 an hour more down the street. All those kinds of things were taking place. We're seeing now in the recent data that not only is it now history, the quits, the amount of people using arbitrage on their employer, putting a gun to their head and saying, I'm going to the next guy to get more money, that is gone, right? Because there is no more money from the next employer over because layoffs are climbing, except for government, healthcare, some specific sectors, right? In Florida, leisure. And by the way, I'm going to keep an eye on the channel because this weekend we're getting Florida's new unemployment numbers. But most of what we're seeing through the country, you're seeing sweeping layoffs in large and small numbers in the financial sectors, the real estate industries. And at the same time, you're still seeing the middle class being squeezed, trying to get into the workforce. You're seeing a new crowd of prime workers who lived in their parents' basement as 25-year-olds saying, I got to get back in this thing. You're seeing unplanned returns to the market. I just mentioned you have the golden year retirement crowd, which is now forced to work at a higher percentage. And at the same time, folks, understand this because I'm talking to these people at ground level. I am seeing more 60, 70 something year old folks. I've shown you the data on this channel where they're borrowing more against their house to get by. They're borrowing more home equity lines. They're bringing mortgages on their house that didn't formerly exist in order to make ends meet, in the hopes, folks, listen, in the hopes that the central bankers, those that are planning, are going to bring the cost of things low enough that they'll actually survive and maybe enjoy their lives. And maybe their money will actually afford something again. But folks, listen, the marketplace for the past 5 weeks has been putting tremendous pressure on Jerome Powell. You've gone too far. You've left rates too high. Just like when they harangued Powell, they said, hey, you didn't raise rates fast enough in the beginning. Prices got out of control. He should have slowed it down. Now he's on the back end of this. He's going to tip us not into a recession. He's caused a depression. Many people have already said that he's already shrunk the supply of capital out of the economy. He's reduced the M2 money supply. He's done things that are going to be severely detrimental, which I find fascinating, folks, that you're seeing so many banks, so many financial institutions, so many of the Wall Street cheerleaders that really want to go out and say nothing other than buy, 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 buy. They're all coming out. Again, mild recession troopers are coming out and saying the word mild recession. So that's interesting to see if that's going to actually break loose and become a full-blown, we could call it a recession this time. We're going to find out. But folks, what lurks behind the decision between the Jerome Powell and the Fed? What lurks behind his idea of the notion that he's backing off? He's got to pull rates back down. Did he actually beat inflation, or did inflation beat him? It's like, we have all these prices going through the roof. And ultimately, folks, the reality he's got a lot of pressure because our government, our congressmen, all the people that run our country spend more and more and more. And they don't print the money. Everybody thinks our Congress is spending too much. They're going into debt. It's not printed money, it's debt. That's how the money is introduced into our system. So essentially, all these random things like giving money to Ukraine, giving money to foreign countries, spending money on ridiculous studies and whatever else we do with money in America, enlarging the size of every government agency on the planet in Washington, D.C., and borrowing and spending this money, basically passing debt to our grandkids and our descendants probably for a decade, folks. And listen, all of that is borrowed and those debts have maturity levels. And Jerome Powell knows that there's going to be stress on banks. There's going to be stress on our federal government because our cost of interest on all this debt that we just keep growing is going to get worse and worse in next year. But folks, the real story is the fact that he hasn't actually reversed any of the built-in money that went into the system. So for everybody that's looking at the situation, your economy is essentially going to stay broke going forward if you leave the cost of food, commodities, and shelters unchecked. If you didn't reverse any of the costs that you drove into the system when you tried to pencil us out and borrow us out of pandemic hustle and basically try to ease all the people's pain back in 2020, 2021, by creating a bunch of funny money that was helicoptered over the land, given to everybody in PPP and all this other stuff that essentially was the decision to say, hey, we're not going to produce anything. We're going to make everybody stay in place and we're going to print money. And now everything's expensive. Now, are we going to just say, line in the sand, we're going to move forward? Or are we actually going to go and reverse that? Because here's the story, folks. What nobody is saying is that inventory is high and it's growing, okay? We are now seeing the need as layoffs increase that people are having to get out of their homes. We already know this. This is a national thing. In Florida, it's much higher. It's fascinating to me that all the states that were in really bad shape in the 2008 crash, California, Arizona, Nevada, and us, Texas now. Texas, I don't think was really in the party in 2008, but they're in the party this time. All of these states, folks, they're the leaders in the country for blowing up inventory because the investors aren't playing musical chair games and investing and hyping the money up anymore. All this story and nonsense that Wall Street is buying up all the houses, that's not a story. They didn't buy up a bunch of houses this year. They bought very few. And because they're not buying any houses, there isn't anyone to buy the houses. We go into 2024. Are we going to see a market crash in Florida? Are we going to see it go down? I think I already did my predictions about a week or two ago. You can go see those. I think we are going to see some softening in Florida. You're going to see some markets down 5 to 10%. You're going to see some opportunities at the wholesale level, meaning people that need to sell their home or have a home that needs a little bit of work, probably 15%, maybe 20 and beyond. So there's going to be plenty of opportunities for you to buy a good house in Florida into the year, but rents are already falling. And the other thing that people are looking at is a lot of people have no clue where this economy is going. There is fear, folks. People look at the Florida market and every day I get an email, I get a call. Is this thing going down? Something feels weird in the next 3 months. In the next 6 months. That is a problem. And that's why there's still hesitancy. That and the fact that people's lives really aren't that much more spared by cost. Shelter and food is still radically expensive. And ultimately, the decisions that are going to be made in the housing market next year, if everybody wants to know, what will happen to my house? Look at what the rents are doing in your area. Because every single person is going to look at that. They're going to say, do I want to get a house right now? Do I want to do something that I may not be able to easily undo as I'm switching jobs or as I'm getting a second job? The reality is we're going back in 2024 and 2025 to the basic decision, which method's cheaper? Is it cheaper to rent or is it cheaper to own? Because right now, that's all that matters. And that's the majority buyer. That's the majority relocator for Florida, plus uncertainty, okay? And so all of that in the face of mounting inventory, folks, you can see where this whole thing goes. But maybe I'm wrong. Tell me in the comments.